About 22 miles east of Amsterdam, the garden of an elderly couple, Angelica and Iep, is packed with bags of hay sent by animal lovers from across the Netherlands. For the past 2 months, twice a day, they have made the short trip to the fence surrounding Oostvaardersplassen to feed the animals. But they must make sure they are not caught by park rangers or the police. What they are doing is illegal and could result in a fine. But after seeing what is happening behind the fence, they simply cannot look away. The Dutch authorities have abandoned the animals. More than 300 have already starved to death, while those still alive have become painfully thin, with their ribs clearly visible beneath their skin. They are so weak that they no longer have enough strength to run away when the rangers approach. Sadly, the very people who are supposed to protect these animals are now the ones carrying guns and shooting those that remain. During the winter of 2018, this world-famous nature reserve was covered with animal carcasses, and the smell of decay filled the air. The killing only stopped after 2,684 red deer, 467 Konik horses, and 75 heck cattle had died or been shot. But can you believe it? These were not invasive animals, nor were they a threat to humans. They had been released into the reserve and cared for by people. So why did humans kill them after bringing them here? The answer is simple, but it shocked the entire world. To understand why the tragedy of 2018 happened, we need to go back to 1968, when this place did not even exist on the map. After the Netherlands pumped the water out of southern Flevoland, a new stretch of land emerged from the seabed. Oostvaardersplassen, therefore, is not an ancient forest or a natural grassland, but a young ecosystem formed on a polder, an engineering achievement that created roughly 5,500 to 5,600 hectares of new land directly from the bottom of the sea. At first, the government planned to use the area for industry, agriculture, and urban development. But because the ground was too low and too wet, the plan was delayed and eventually abandoned completely in 1990. Nature immediately seized the opportunity. Water began to collect, reeds spread across the landscape, and about 3,600 hectares became wetlands, while the remaining 1,900 hectares stayed relatively dry. Fish and other aquatic animals appeared, attracting geese, spoonbills, and cormorants. At its peak, more than 60,000 greylag geese arrived here to molt. By feeding on young reed shoots and trampling through the mud, they helped keep areas of open water clear and prevented the wetlands from becoming completely overgrown. It was at this point that ecologist Frans Vera observed what was happening and recognized a principle that would later change the world. Animals do not simply live in a landscape, they also shape and create it. However, the dry areas were beginning to be overtaken too quickly by willow trees and dense shrubs. According to the theory of ecological succession, without a force to hold them back, the grasslands would eventually turn into young forest, destroying the habitat of birds that feed on the ground. To solve this problem, a groundbreaking animal release project was launched. It quickly became a major focus of international scientific attention and was even widely praised in the famous 2013 documentary, The New Wilderness. Now, let us see how humans began intervening in this landscape. The early stages were somewhat uncertain. In 1983, the first transport trucks brought 32 heck cattle from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland into Oostvaardersplassen. Imagine the herd stepping onto this windswept land, surrounded by mud, reeds, and strips of grass stretching all the way to the horizon. The cattle were chosen to eat tall grass, break down coarse vegetation, trample open pathways, and create patches of disturbed ground. 1 year later, as the idea of introducing large animals into the area became less unfamiliar, 20 Konik horses from Poland and Belgium were released onto the grasslands. They grazed closer to the ground than cattle, remained active throughout the year, and maintained short grasslands where geese could feed. But there is something we need to make clear. Konik horses are often promoted as wild horses, but they are actually a Polish domestic breed living under semi-wild conditions. A 2021 scientific review found no evidence that they are more closely related to the extinct tarpan than other domestic horse breeds. The modern Konik population also descends from 6 male bloodlines, selected largely for their physical appearance. By 1992, another 42 red deer from Scotland and the Veluwe region had been introduced. They moved through the willow thickets, feeding on leaves and young shoots while preventing woody plants from regenerating too quickly. With only 94 founding animals, they completely transformed the landscape. The area was enclosed by fences, there were no large predators, and the management philosophy was based on minimal human intervention. Food availability, winter weather, and competition were expected to regulate the animal populations naturally. But it seems they had forgotten one important factor. We will return to it later, because what happened here would eventually become a worldwide lesson in ecological restoration. Fortunately, during the early years, the experiment seemed to succeed beyond all expectations, transforming the area into an ecosystem of almost unbelievable productivity. Konik horses grazed the grass close to the ground. Heck cattle handled the tall, coarse vegetation, while red deer were responsible for browsing on leaves and young shoots. A scientific report from the ICMO2 committee confirmed that this natural grazing pressure had completely halted ecological succession, preventing the landscape from turning into dense young woodland. The short, open grasslands created ideal conditions for northern lapwings and European golden plovers, whose populations increased dramatically, far exceeding the overall trend seen across the Netherlands. Oostvaardersplassen quickly became an internationally famous bird paradise, attracting nearly half of northwestern Europe's greylag geese during their molting season. The greatest milestone came in 2006, when white-tailed eagles returned to breed here, the first time they had done so in the Netherlands since the Middle Ages. Even in the final report of 2025, park rangers recorded the spectacular sight of 11 young eagles proudly perched together in a single tree. The extraordinary richness of this newly reclaimed, fertile land pushed reproduction rates to unimaginable levels. From just 94 founding animals, the population had surged to 3,400 by November 2010. By the end of 2017, the number had reached an alarming level: 5,230 large animals, most of them concentrated within only about 2,000 hectares of dry land. But wait, this was already an unusually high density. As the numbers of horses, cattle, and deer increased too quickly, the ecological mosaic that scientists had hoped for, short grass, tall grass, shrubs, woodland, and wetlands, gradually turned into a landscape grazed almost completely flat. Just look at it. Newly emerging shoots were eaten before they had any chance to mature, while shrubs were given no opportunity to recover. A 2024 study found that high-density grazing can increase the number of small plant species that tolerate trampling, but at the same time, it can make the overall landscape structure increasingly uniform on a larger scale. The once rich landscape had now become flat, bare, and monotonous, and it did not stop there. A brutal struggle for survival began within the herds themselves. A report from the ICMO2 committee confirmed that Konik horses and red deer, both capable of grazing extremely close to the ground, competed intensely for food. They gradually outcompeted the Heck cattle, pushing their population into a serious decline after 2005. At the same time, the entire ecosystem began to fracture. Of the 33 bird species assessed in the area, as many as 17 experienced severe declines. This was not because the horses or cattle directly drove them away. Instead, it was caused by a devastating combination of stagnant water levels and intense grazing pressure from geese, which consumed nearly all the young reed shoots and caused the wetlands to deteriorate. Now, instead of the poetic image of a new wilderness celebrated in 2013, all that remained was a damaged and exhausted landscape, dead trees standing like skeletons, and herds of painfully thin animals waiting to collapse beneath the approaching blade of winter. Why did a project of international importance collapse? There was not just one reason, but three. The first mistake was the severe absence of apex predators. With predators such as wolves and bears completely missing, combined with a hands-off management approach, the ecosystem lost its natural biological break. As a result, the population exploded from the original 94 animals to more than 55 times that number, reaching 5,230 by the end of 2017. This overcrowding led to the second mistake, an ecological trap created by seasonal imbalance. During the summer, the fertile reclaimed land deceived the herds with what seemed like an endless supply of food, encouraging rapid reproduction. But when winter arrived, the grass stopped growing, turning that seasonal abundance into a widespread nightmare of hunger. Under natural conditions, animals would migrate when food became scarce. But the third mistake eliminated that possibility through geographic isolation. The herds were trapped in desperation between fences, railroad tracks, and surrounding urban areas. When the proposed ecological corridor connecting the reserve to Horsterwold Forest remained permanently on paper, their only possible escape route was cut off. And when winter finally arrived, this land became a barren prison, where thousands of living creatures paid with their lives for an incomplete ecological experiment. In reality, the tragedy of 2018 was not unexpected at all. Did you know that chilling warnings had been issued long before it happened? As early as 2005, public outrage erupted after large numbers of animals collapsed and died during the winter, forcing scientists to introduce proactive shooting to end the prolonged suffering of animals that were already severely weakened. By 2010, ICMO 2 issued another warning. The extremely high population density would greatly intensify competition for food during winter and could lead to mass die-offs. All the evidence was already there, yet people still chose to ignore it. And that is what ultimately led to the slaughter of 2018. In October 2017, a population count recorded nearly 5,500 red deer, Konik horses, and heck cattle at Oostvaardersplassen. Most of them were concentrated on less than 1,900 hectares of grassland, equal to nearly 2.8 large animals per hectare. In just 1 year, the population had increased by nearly 700 animals. 2 mild winters had previously allowed many individuals to survive, but they had also pushed hundreds of additional mouths into the next cold season. Now, let us move closer and witness what was happening. That winter brought long periods of steady rain, turning the ground into a soft, muddy swamp that was constantly trampled by thousands of hooves. The grass did not simply become thinner. In many places, it disappeared completely. Had you been standing there, you would have seen animals keeping their heads lowered for hours over ground that was almost entirely bare. Some began stripping bark from trees, chewing dry branches, and searching for anything that might still provide them with energy. In late February and then March 2018, a late cold spell arrived just as many animals had nearly exhausted their fat reserves. Deer began standing apart from the herd. Horses moved slowly. Some animals barely reacted when park rangers approached because they no longer had enough strength to run away. Under the early reactive culling policy, rangers had to examine the animal's visible ribs, their gait, their behavior, and their chances of continued survival. If an animal was almost certain to die, they were required to shoot it before it collapsed and endured prolonged suffering. But out on those grasslands, the dividing line was brutally difficult. Shooting too early could be seen as killing an animal that still had some hope of surviving. Shooting too late meant that the bullet served only as a final ending after days of hunger and cold. By the end of March, 2,969 animals had died. By the end of April, that number had risen to 3,226, including 2,684 red deer, 467 Konik horses, and 75 heck cattle. About 89% were shot by park rangers, while the rest died naturally. So yes, most of them died from bullets. Yes, they died from bullets, but those bullets were only the final release from a deeply flawed management system. When images of skeletal deer and horses standing motionless beside the fence appeared on television, Oostvaardersplassen immediately became the center of outrage across the Netherlands. As you saw in the opening scene, people drove tractors and trucks loaded with hay to the reserve, dragged heavy bales across the railroad tracks, and threw them over the fence to the animals gathering on the other side. One group claimed to have delivered as many as 410 bales in a single night, despite the risk of fines and serious accidents. Ankie van Grunsven, an Olympic gold medal-winning equestrian, and illusionist Hans Klok publicly condemned what they described as animal abuse. A petition supported by biologist Patrick van Veen collected approximately 125,000 signatures. Some protesters even made extreme comparisons, while park rangers and ecologists received death threats online. The pressure quickly spread beyond social media. Police received more than 700 calls reporting animals in distress. Members of the public entered restricted areas without permission and continued feeding the animals illegally. On 1 Maart 2018, the province of Flevoland was forced to order Staatsbosbeheer to begin officially providing food, even though many experts warned that doing so would only allow the population to keep growing and cause the crisis to happen again. From March 1 to May 3, Reserve managers brought in about 600 metric tons of hay, equal to roughly 1,200 bales. Feeding began at 7 locations before expanding to 10. The cattle and horses consumed most of the hay, while the deer ate less. Even so, this action created a painful contradiction within the scientific community. Members of the public argued that because humans had introduced these animals, humans were responsible for feeding and caring for them. Ecologists, however, warned that artificial feeding would only increase the size of the herds, trigger more trampling and competition, and push this biological trap into an even more destructive cycle. In addition to calm public outrage, around 180 Konik horses were removed from Oostvaardersplassen in 2019 and transferred to nature reserves in Spain and Belarus. Imagine the herds that had once roamed freely across the grasslands, now being gathered into holding pens, given health checks, and then led one by one onto trucks for long-distance transport. Instead of being killed, they were given a new role, continuing to graze, control shrub growth, and support rewilding efforts in other parts of Europe. The relocation was part of a plan to reduce the horse population to around 450 following the crisis that had caused the deaths of thousands of animals. But this was neither a long-term nor a cost-effective solution. Each transfer required a suitable destination, quarantine facilities, veterinary inspections, trained personnel, and vehicles capable of transporting live animals over thousands of kilometers. The number of reserves with enough space to receive hundreds of horses was also extremely limited. For red deer, capture and transport were even more dangerous because the animals could easily panic, crash into fences, and suffer severe stress. As a result, the planned reduction of around 1,800 deer was to be carried out mainly through controlled shooting. As grazing pressure declined, Oostvaardersplassen began to take on a different appearance. Areas that had once been grazed almost bare were no longer covered by a single, monotonous layer of short grass. Tall grasses and herbaceous plants gradually returned, while young willows, shrubs, and strips of reeds along the ponds had a better chance of surviving the growing season without being completely eaten. If you stood in the reserve today, you could see a much clearer mosaic of habitats. Short grasslands where geese feed, patches of coarse grass rising as high as a deer's belly, shrubs that provide shelter for birds, and reeds swaying along the water's edge. Reserve managers say that keeping the population near the target levels of about 500 red deer, 300 Konik horses, and 300 heck cattle helps reduce grazing pressure while still maintaining enough large animals to prevent the grasslands from closing into young forest. However, reducing the herds only addressed the dry land. The wetlands were still losing reeds because water levels had remained stable for too long, while thousands of geese continuously consumed the young shoots. Beginning in 2020, Staatsbosbeheer carried out a marsh reset across more than 200 hectares in the western section. Water levels were lowered, exposed mud was allowed to receive sunlight, some of the carp were removed, and conditions were created for reed seeds to germinate. After 5 years, more than 600 hectares of new reed beds had formed, exceeding the original target of 500 hectares. In 2024, even a shallow layer of water spreading across the exposed mud quickly attracted around 800 spoonbills. By the end of 2025, more than 600 hectares of young reeds had recovered, turning the edges of the wetlands into ideal hiding places. On the 31st of October 2025, the water control gates were officially closed to capture incoming rainfall and reflood the marshes as part of a healthier ecological cycle. But this is still not a perfect ending. In April 2026, dry conditions and large numbers of geese slowed the growth of young grass, forcing managers to provide targeted supplemental feed for the heck cattle. This shows that Oostvaardersplassen has recovered, but it still cannot function entirely on its own. Horses keep the grasslands open, water helps restore the reed beds, and humans must now monitor both before another imbalance begins. However, allowing the vegetation to become too dense has unintentionally reduced the open, short grass areas that provide essential feeding grounds for greylag, geese, and plovers. This is the painful paradox. Restoring one species can place another in a more difficult position. So what is this place like today? As of mid-July 2026, Oostvaardersplassen has entered a completely different era. The herds are no longer allowed to reproduce freely until winter decides which animals live and which ones die. An aerial count conducted by helicopter and thermal cameras In October 2025, recorded 770 red deer, 420 Konik horses, and 380 heck cattle, a total of 1,570 animals after the breeding season. The annual population increase was then removed from the area to bring the total back toward the spring target of approximately 1,100 animals. During the winter of 2024-2025, there was enough natural food available to maintain the herds in good condition, and no supplemental hay was needed. But that does not mean the sound of gunfire has disappeared completely. 8.2. From August 2022 to the 1st of May 2023, nearly 1,800 red deer were removed from the reserve, reducing the herd to approximately 500 animals. The venison was sold to consumers, while a small portion of the carcasses was left on the grasslands, where ravens, foxes, insects, and white-tailed eagles continued returning nutrients to the ecosystem. The heck cattle population is maintained at around 300 animals, while Konik horses are either transferred to other nature reserves or sent for slaughter. Since then, removing the additional animals born each year has become part of routine population management, replacing the massive herd reduction campaigns of the past. If you had stood here in the spring of 2026, the scene would have looked very different from 2018. Fresh grass once again covered the plains, calves followed closely behind their mothers, and the herds remained alert and responsive when park rangers approached. Dry conditions early in the year meant the cattle required targeted supplemental feeding in April. But by May 27, veterinarians reported strong vegetation growth. The cattle had an average body condition score of 3, while both the horses and red deer were in good condition. Looking back at the entire story, the horses, cattle, and deer helped Oostvaardersplassen preserve its open grasslands, created feeding grounds for many bird species, and proved that large animals can reshape an entire landscape. But when their populations grew beyond control, young trees disappeared, winter food supplies ran out, and thousands of animals became trapped behind fences. Oostvaardersplassen does not prove that rewilding is a failure. It shows that simply releasing animals is not enough. An ecosystem also needs room for migration, a diversity of habitats, natural water cycles, and scientific monitoring. But if humans decide the size of the herds, where trees are allowed to grow, and which animals must die, can this still be called true wilderness, or is it simply an ecosystem controlled by humans? Share your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring real stories of nature restoration.